Thank you for joining us. Our show today will present a discussion about Israel, past and present, from the perspectives of Colonel Raanan Gissin. He served as the senior advisor to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and as a frequent spokesman for the Israel government on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox networks. He is regarded as one of Israel's leading spokesmen on security and strategic issues and the peace process. He specializes in the Arab-Israeli conflict and will update us on the ever-changing Middle East following these messages.
I read Life Extension magazine to keep abreast of medical discoveries that can literally save my life. Life Extension's track record dating back to 1980 shows that they are decades ahead of conventional medicine in identifying proven methods to prevent and treat the diseases of aging. Reading Life Extension magazine will empower you to take control over your health and longevity. And as a special favor to me, the Life Extension Foundation will give a free 1-year subscription to anyone today. Just call the number on this screen to obtain your free Life Extension subscription. There's no cost, no obligation, just the opportunity to discover solid options to live longer and better. Call the number on the screen today to start receiving Life Extension magazine each month.
Take charge of your health. Get your free subscription to Life Extension magazine now by calling toll-free 1-800-509-9117 or visit www.lef.org.
I'm Steve Hochstadt. I teach history at Illinois College, and I've just written a book about Jews who went to Shanghai. That may sound exotic. 16,000 German and Austrian Jews saved themselves from the Holocaust by going to Shanghai. My grandparents were among them. When I first got interested in this story, it was my family story. But I realized that this is much bigger. This is a story of Jewish survival. It's a dramatic human story of escape from danger. This book is available online from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other retailers. You can ask for it at your local bookstore. I think you'll find reading it as fascinating as I found putting it together.
With us now is Dr. Raanan Gissin. Raanan, if I may call you by your first name.
Again, Richard.
You say that, and actually the first time we sat together on camera was in those jolly days in the first Gulf War in '91.
Right.
You were in uniform, and then I addressed you as Colonel Raanan Gissin. You were the army spokesman on TV all over the world, in fact.
Being a soldier is a way of life in Israel, so I'm still in the reserve. I still do reserve duty there, and I still jump out of airplanes.
Yes, just recently, I understand. How odd it is that during that first war in which we did the interview, all these Scuds were fired at Israel, and other than a lot of damage, casualties were minuscule.
I think the first Gulf War was a sort of a harbinger to a new reality, to a new Middle East. We see the wars that are taking place today and the threats with 50,000 rockets and missiles in Lebanon itself. With the disintegration of Syria, there'll be probably several thousands more missiles aimed at Israel, and some of them with chemical warheads. I think the Gulf War really opened the Pandora box of the new reality that we live today through in the Middle East. And as the war went after that, the wars that came after that clearly were harsher and had contained in them more, I would say, carnage and more destructive capability than the Gulf War itself. So that's definitely the reality we're living today in 2013, 2 years after the Arab Spring turned into, I would say, an Islamic winter, really, as a result of it. So the hopes of peace and the hopes of a new Middle East are being dashed by this new reality that we see today, which basically I would say is the disintegration of nation states and political entities that were created at the turn of World War I. The only one entity that seems to survive and that withstood all the tests of time and that its shelf life has not expired is the State of Israel. Basically because, contrary to what you hear in the halls of the UN and with the DBS and delegitimization campaign, this is really the only legitimate entity that exists in the Middle East. Government by the people, for the people, natural people coming to their own natural homeland, and now they also have natural gas.
Amazing. Let's talk about the history a little bit. The Arab world is actually larger in area than the United States of America, and they have vast lands, vast wealth. Why on earth do Muslim countries want tiny little Israel?
Well, I think the conflict has more to do with the perceptions, with ideology, with beliefs, with paradigms, competing paradigms, rather than with territory or resources. It's not the territorial question. It's the fact that Israel, as it is today, in reality and the narrative it projects, is an antithesis to what many of the Arab countries and the Muslim world want. They want to bring the world backwards, to a time of glorious past of the Caliphites and the Muslim ruled that part of the world and other parts of the world. And Israel is really facing, her face is towards the future, looking at a different reality, something, to move ahead. And here you have forces like, the forces of evil, like Iran, like Hezbollah, like Al-Qaeda. They want to take the Arab world and pull it backwards. And therefore, Israel stands as an antithesis to this perception. And the fact that it succeeds makes things even worse. If Israel was a failure, then it's not a threat. But it's a threat to that perception, because here is a model that particularly the younger generation today in the Arab world can look at it, can compare it to their way of life. And remember the technology that they have at their hands today, the internet, the social networks, Facebook, Twitter, enables them to see things as they are rather than listen to the propaganda that their countries or their leaders are trying to add. And in addition to that, there is the demographic factor. They are today over 20% of the population. In other words, the age group between 14 and 24 in the Arab world is 20% of the total 300 million Arabs that live here. Restless, jobless, hopeless, but also more educated. And they get their information, and they're not afraid of the regime because they got something to substitute fear with, I would say, cyber solidarity. They speak to each other, they talk to each other, gives them enormous power. And as a result of that, they compare. They look at Israel. Here's a working model, a living model. And what do the Islamists offer them? And what do the other radical groups offer them? No, just go back to the past. And therefore, what happens is that as a result of this force, this uncontainable force of the young and the restless and the jobless, every now and then you find another group or another group of people in the Arab world, like in Egypt or in Syria or in Iraq, try to ride the tiger. But the tiger is a hungry and angry tiger, and it throws them off. So right now you see the Islamists running the show. Okay, they took over in Egypt. But that's only temporarily. They're not, because what happened really is basically a question of legitimacy and the type of government that they were there. The government that was before, their legitimacy was based on fear. And basically the fear went in one direction. The street, the Tahrir Square, the Dara, Damascus, was afraid of the palace. The fear, because the palace knew how to suppress the masses in the street and control it. They no longer control it. And now the fear is reversed. Now those who sit in the palace are afraid of the streets, are afraid of these young people who are moving ahead, and you can't buy them. The young and the restless, as I call them, which are 20% of the population, cannot be bought, cannot be bought by promises, cannot be contained by fear, the fear that was instilled in them. They're not afraid of the bullets. They run against the bullets.
So are things actually any better at all or more promising? Because whereas you're alluding to technology and education being a factor, which sounds very promising, of course, on the other hand, it seems that the Middle East is far less stable than it was 10 years ago.
Richard, you're absolutely right. John Foster Dulles once said that every time you have a major crisis, you also have new opportunities. A crisis creates opportunities. And rather, because of the disintegration of countries like Syria, like Iraq, and the rise of new forces, there are new opportunities, particularly for Israel, to find its place in the Middle East. Or I would say to surf on these tsunami waves. Because you have the country disintegrate into their component parts. Minority groups. There are Cherkessians, there are Kurds, there are Christians, there are Muslim of various... And some of them may be aligned with Israel. But this is not the job of the foreign ministry, by the way. This is the job of Mossad, of the intelligence service of Israel. You have to work under the radar screen, under the radar scope. And that is quietly, like we did, I would say, in the 60s in Africa, when Israel brought food and hope to countries that were on the verge of starvation, which did not have relations with Israel because of the 67 and 73 war. But Israel was working in over 30 countries, providing them with the technology and the know-how, how to survive.
And did that, hold on a second. And did that help? Did they appreciate?
Well, I think they did over time. Yes, they did. But look at the reality of the Middle East 5 years from now. The real crisis of the Middle East is not going to be democracy. The real crisis of the Middle East is going to be starvation, a humanitarian crisis of proportions you can't imagine, something like Africa. Because in Syria today alone, you have 1 million refugees outside of Syria and 3 million refugees inside Syria, with a severe shortage of water. No water. There's no water. Syria cannot supply water to its people. All the agriculture has been destroyed as a result of that. And if it wasn't for the money that the Russians, that the Iranians are supplying with to Assad, and the weapons that they provide, the whole country would be completely disintegrate. And the crisis, the humanitarian, you see more and more refugees, and look what's happened in Iraq, and look what happened in other Arab countries. There'll be hordes of refugees running around the Middle East looking for jobs, looking for work, and really the only way that you can think about to inject some stability into the Middle East is maybe if there is a superpower and maybe a regional power that can work together towards some sort of a Marshall Plan for these countries.
Well, you know, the ever-changing Middle East, it's really astonishing to see and witness all that's going on. But what hope is there for the future? What do you see?
Well, I think Israel, for example, has the technology. If Israel finds inroads to some of the Arab countries and some of the people there, it can provide them with help to sustain themselves, to keep themselves alive, which is going to be a major issue. Israel will survive. I always look at Israel, you know, in the metaphor of the Iron Man running in the desert. Why does it beat all the other Ironmen, all the other athletes who run in the desert, and the Middle East is a desert? Because it has a survival suit, almost an unseen survival suit, with water, with food, with medicine. It can survive. Now, what we can offer other people in the Middle East is these means of survival. What kind of regime are we going to have in Syria in the future? But these people, first and foremost, need food on their table. Who's going to provide it? How are they going to rebuild themselves out of the ruins? You know, that's a major problem right now. And by the way, the Arab Spring began because of an economic crisis, because of the fact that governments like from Tunisia, through Egypt, through Syria, could not give the basic necessities that the people needed. So the situation as it was 2 years ago was already exacerbated. Now it's just a disaster.
So the entire movement, this uprising, has not actually produced any solutions. It's actually made things worse.
Yeah, I would use some of the traditional Marxist terms and say this is like a permanent revolution. It continues. And the way you can look at it is every now and then someone tries to ride this tiger, but this tiger is so angry and so hungry that it throws him off, eats the guy, and the next guy comes up and tries to, like in Egypt, you are going to see successive efforts, by government to run the country. Muhammad Morsi wakes up every morning in his El Ittihadi palace, looks out the window, and he gets a headache. He says, how am I going to feed 80 million people? How am I going to sustain 1.5 million more every year? And he doesn't have it. Sinai is not in his control, it's in control of the terrorists, and that would provide him with maybe $4 to $5 billion a year of gas and tourism. If he doesn't have peace with Israel, then all the economic benefits that accrue from the peace will not be there. The Suez Canal is another source of income, and without the US aid that he gets, he won't be able to feed his people. After all, Kissinger was right. It's domestic politics.
Raanan, it's a great pleasure having you with us. And on that happy note, we will end this conversation. Thank you for being with us.